Nguyen Thi Binh memoir, family, friends and country. She broke stereotypes. She captivated the world. During the Vietnam War, which is known in Vietnam as the American War, U.S. leaders led those of us in the West to believe the Viet Cong were ignorant, barefoot peasants. Then, on November 4, 1968, there appeared on the world stage at the Paris Conference on Vietnam the Viet Cong's official advance representative, a petite, demure woman of startling elegance and presence in an áo dai, the Vietnamese traditional dress that looks like a Western evening gown. She spoke quietly, calmly, forcefully. The world listened. Her name was Nguyen Thi Binh, but this was not her real name. So, who was she? Now, at last, we can know. Nguyen Thi Binh, 1927. Birth name, Nguyen Thi Chow Sa. First revolutionary alias, Yen Sa, came from a family of patriots. Her maternal grandfather was the famous and beloved patriot scholar Phan Chau Trinh, 1872–1926. Her father, also a patriot, worked for the French administration as a surveyor, taking his family with him in the Mekong Delta, where they lived on a boat. Later, the family moved to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where young Chow Sa studied in a French school. She was the eldest child and close to her siblings, as she is today. Chow Sa excelled in mathematics and sports. She competed in cross-country races and basketball games, an American invention. Then the revolution and war intervened, as it did for all Vietnamese of her generation. My Binh, as she is called by many people both inside and outside Vietnam, never finished her baccalaureate. However, she holds a doctorate from a prestigious French institution in the colonial prison system for political activists. The French and later the Americans thought they could repress nationalism by arresting revolutionary patriots. Instead, their jails became graduate schools, where political prisoners organized classes and shared expertise. The curricula ranged from literacy training to the Chinese ideographs in Tang Dynasty poetry, from basic numeracy training to mathematics and physics, from the works of Victor Hugo, Marx, and Lenin to those of Ho Chi Minh. In April 1951, the American-backed Saigon authorities arrested Yen Sa and held her in Catinat Detention Center. Like her brothers and sisters in the revolution, she was tortured. Political prisoners passed along personal experiences on how to organize for the revolution and how to withstand torture if arrested. Writing now, many years later, Nguyen Thi Binh gives her readers a mini lesson. I was cruelly beaten without stopping because an earlier arrestee had broken down under torture and given my name. First, they tortured with savage beatings, then by submerging us in water, then with electricity, then I wanted to die so they would finish. I was most worried about breaking under torture and giving names, leading the enemy to arrest others. I decided that I would accept whatever the enemy said about me, but my one purpose was to say nothing else. After a time, the torturers saw they could not wrest any information from me. My Binh spent 3 years in Kai Hoa, the most infamous of the Saigon prisons. Political prisoner, doctoral graduates. During the French War and the American War learned how to be stalwart under the most intense pressure imaginable. That lesson served them well in many venues. While at Paris, My Binh was deputy head of the delegation from the National Liberation Front, NLF, of South Vietnam until the formation of the Provisional Revolutionary Government, PRG, of the Republic of South Vietnam on June 6, 1969, whereupon she became the PRG foreign minister and the head of the PRG delegation to the Paris Conference. Henry Kissinger and his American colleagues at the Paris Conference on Vietnam, 1968–1973, faced 3 key Vietnamese opponents: Le Duc Tho, special advisor to the delegation from the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, the DRVN, or North Vietnam, Xuan Thuy, head of the DRVN delegation, and me. Binh. All three held doctorates from prestigious French institutions. In his introduction to the Vietnamese edition of Family, Friends and Country, writer Nguyen Ngoc cautions readers not to expect new information about the Paris Conference. However, Nguyen Ngoc was writing for Vietnamese, who had seen or read many interviews with Paris participants. In contrast, international readers will find much to learn from Nguyen Thi Binh, the only living signatory to the Paris Agreement. International readers may be surprised to see that, on January 1, 1969, the Vietnamese published Ho Chi Minh's New Year's greetings. With President Ho's unshakable two-step strategy. His New Year's poem ran on the Vietnamese newspapers' front pages. Liberation Radio in the South and Voice of Vietnam in the North repeatedly promulgated the President's greetings. U.S. leaders seem not to have paid much attention. Yet the Vietnamese in both the former North and former South who participated in the war's three arrows, the interlocking political, military, and diplomatic initiatives can still recite the two-stage plan that President Ho crystallized in his quatrain's second line. Fight so the Americans leave. Fight so the puppets collapse. The Paris Agreement completed the first step in President Ho's strategy. As Nguyen Thi Binh writes, we achieved a momentous victory. The United States was forced to withdraw completely, while Vietnamese troops remained on Vietnamese land. Family, Friends and Country answers many questions about deeper levels of the Vietnamese two-stage strategy. Binh's writing style is subtle and fluid. It is easy to read this book quickly and miss important points. For example, many Westerners wonder about the relationship between the DRVN and PRG delegations at Paris. Nguyen Thi Binh may be the first Vietnamese writing for a general audience to state the relationship clearly, but she does so briefly. Although two, we were one. Although one, we were two. The two delegations were closely coordinated under one source of flexible, precise guidance, which came from inside our country. The National Liberation Front had been established on December 20, 1960 as a neutral, neither overtly pro-communist nor overtly pro-capitalist, all-inclusive organization of patriots to represent the people of the South. The neutral stance allowed the NLF-PRG to participate and subsequently to join the non-aligned movement. Official neutrality also fostered greater access to the international peace and anti-war movements. Nevertheless, senior NLF-PRG leaders were party activists. Their key visionary was Ho Chi Minh, who determined not only the overall NLF-PRG strategy but also many of its subtleties. Attentive readers will notice that Tran Bu Kiem, head of the NLF delegation, and Nguyen Thi Binh, head of the PRG delegation, which replaced the NLF delegation at Paris, and not Xuan Thuy, head of the DRVN delegation the North, presented the 10 points, 8 points, 7 points, and 2 points in successive diplomatic offensives. The two delegations' shared goal was independence and freedom for South Vietnam and reunification of the entire country. Thus, readers will notice that Binh returned from a consultative visit in Hanoi with the 10 points in hand. DRVN delegation head Xuan Thuy, a journalist, newspaper editor, poet, chess aficionado, and diplomat, was famous for his smile, dignified bearing, and his genuine, perceptive charm. His subtlety kept the focus on the NLF-PRG as representatives of the Southern people. He would gracefully and astutely use the Western custom of ladies first to introduce the genteel representative of the Viet Cong first, thereby emphasizing the PRG position. Xuan Thuy could not have done this so easily had the PRG delegation's head been a man. Vietnam, a small country, faced a behemoth at Paris. Ho Chi Minh was a realist with many years' experience living in the West, including a year in the United States when he was in his early 20s. President Ho and his colleagues knew that to negotiate successfully with the United States they must first draw world opinion behind their cause. American leaders, remembering that Vietnam had recently fought a war with France, may have thought Paris would give the United States a slight advantage at the negotiations. The opposite was true. The DRVN and NLF were delighted with the choice of Paris, even though Paris was a long distance from Hanoi. Members of both delegations had many French friends both officially and informally. On September 1, 1966, French President Charles de Gaulle, speaking in Phnom Penh, had delivered his famous policy statement urging American withdrawal. The French government offered to host the Paris conference and financially supported the DRVN and NLF-PRG delegations with security and transportation. In addition, France had an active Communist Party, which contributed housing for the delegations, arranged sites for the private bilateral meetings that the DRVN hosted, and supplied security personnel and drivers. Overseas Vietnamese living in Paris provided tailored suits for the men, custom-fitted ao dais for the women, and home-cooked family meals so delegates could savor ordinary family life with children. The overseas Vietnamese also provided interpretation at public press events, although of course they were never involved in any official or even informal diplomatic meetings. Most important of all, the overseas Vietnamese showed up en masse in front of Kleber International Conference Center, waving DRVN and NLF-PRG flags. Paris was the media capital of Europe and a perfect setting for the long-term tactic of seeking international press coverage and widespread citizen support from across the world for the Vietnamese cause in general and, in particular, for President Ho's strategic Step 1 American withdrawal. The DRVN and NLF-PRG delegations each included a solid contingent of journalists. Liberation Radio in the South telegraphed out to Hanoi the news of American offensives, atrocities, and bombing in the South. Each week, a North Vietnamese envoy traveled overland from the center of the country to Hanoi, carrying news and photographic film about U.S. bombing in that region. Hanoi then forwarded the latest news and documentation from both the North and the South to Paris in time for the Thursday post-conference briefings. Delegation journalists wrote press releases, while Xuan Thuy and Nguyen Thi Binh concentrated on interviews with radio, TV, and print journalists from all over the world, in addition to their Thursday briefings. Overseas Vietnamese living in Paris sponsored their own press conferences and provided additional interpreters. This complex, carefully directed publicity galvanized world opinion in support of the DRVN and NLF-PRG delegations' shared cause. Such international exposure, which was impossible in Hanoi, was facilitated by the conference location in Paris. Nevertheless, the public relations process was daunting and draining. Family, friends and country offers an intimate view of me. Bin's apprehension when facing aggressive Western journalists. In addition, we also now have the backstory for the thorny question of North Vietnamese soldiers in the South. Nguyen Thi Binh had received a simple yet seemingly impossible directive. You must not say Northern troops are in the South. You must not say Northern troops are not in the South. As one of the long-haired warriors in Paris, Binh had clear marching orders. She tells us how she held her stance, parrying the journalists' fiercely repetitive, aggressive questions. Now, too, we have the truth of the personal worries lying beneath Nguyen Thi Binh' composure. She spoke about the U.S. bombing of civilians, hiding her anxiety when she did not know if her young son and daughter had survived U.S. bombs. She spoke about political prisoners, concealing her personal agony. Very shortly after her appointment to Paris, the US-backed Saigon authorities arrested Me Bin's younger brother, Nguyen Dong Ha, whom the authorities tortured and detained for nearly 7 years in Con Son prison's tiger cages. The French had secured rights to Con Son Island south of Saigon in 1783 but occupied it only in 1861. They began to turn the island into a prison for political activists in 1862. In 1940, the French added 120 tiger cages. Guards walking on the rebar roof threw lime down on the prisoners. One cage usually held 5 prisoners. The cells, dimensions of 1.45 by 2.5 meters, meant 2 prisoners slept atop the other 3. Unlike American POWs captured in the South and in the North during the U.S. Air War, Nguyen Dong Ha was not released in accordance with the January 1973 Paris Agreement. He and many other Vietnamese in the South were not freed from the tiger cages until May 1, 1975, the day after the war ended. The DRVN and NLFPRG's shared strategy at Paris also included people-to-people diplomacy, where individuals and groups seek to affect policy. In Family, Friends and Country, Nguyen Thi Binh describes a tête-à-tête supper conversation with Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi. President Ho emphasized the importance of organizing people worldwide. International readers will be impressed to see how much careful thought, planning, and just plain good luck contributed to the success of the NLFPRG's activities with the peace and anti-war movements in Europe, Africa, Latin America, the former Soviet Union, China, and North America, particularly the United States. These efforts included the more formal activities with the Non-Aligned Nations movement. In those days, the NAM meetings were gatherings of male heads of state and foreign ministers. One can imagine how the entrance of a petite Asian woman in an elegant ao dai accented with a silk neck scarf must have turned heads, causing senior NAM leaders to whisper, "Who is that?" Many international activists would have found these challenges daunting, but the DRVN and NLFPRG delegations' commitment to their cause was unshakable. Me Bin's skills and natural talents, all the more remarkable for a woman at that time, made such commitment even more effective. As Nguyen Thi Binh makes clear in the beginning of this memoir, she came to maturity during the mid-late 1940s and early 1950s as a community organizer of mass demonstrations in Saigon. Now, for the first time, we have in English an account of the French re-invasion of Saigon, with British and American backing, in late September 1945, 3 weeks after Vietnam's declaration of independence. The perspective is that of a young, idealistic, 18-year-old. We are there with young Me Binh at the outset of the French War in her efforts to persuade others to the cause, there with her in the mass demonstrations, and there for her youthful breaches of discipline, which exposed her undercover identity. Perhaps most surprising for Western readers will be Me Binh's first-hand account of the repression of activists, attempts to promulgate the contents of the 1954 Geneva Agreement. Those arrested included the wealthy Saigon lawyer and activist, Nguyen Hu Tho, later vice president of reunited Vietnam. For Me Binh, her later roles at Paris and in people-to-people diplomacy were versions of her earlier community organizing writ large on the world stage. An unasked question remains: who cast Nguyen Thi Binh for this role? It seems likely that only one person in the Politburo of the Vietnamese Workers' Party, now the Vietnamese Communist Party, had the depth of vision and the breadth of experience to think of choosing a woman. President Ho Chi Minh had lived in New York and Boston during the peak of the women's suffrage movement before World War I. After World War I, he lived and worked in Paris. His earliest writings about women's rights appeared in 1922. During the mid-1920s, he pushed women's rights in his classes and writings for young revolutionaries. Ho Chi Minh knew that, regardless of political affiliation, overseas Vietnamese esteemed Nguyen Thi Binh, maternal grandfather, Phan Chau Trinh, as a great patriot, nationalist, and early Vietnamese advocate of democracy. Phan Chau Trinh had mentored young Ho Chi Minh during their shared years in Paris from the late teens through the early 1920s. From family, friends and country, we know Ho Chi Minh asked to meet Nguyen Thi Binh shortly after she regrouped from the south to the north in accordance with requirements stipulated in the 1954 Geneva Agreement. Binh met Ho Chi Minh subsequently on various occasions before the Paris Conference. President Ho knew that Nguyen Thi Binh possessed the generous, open, and honest personality needed to win over those holding different views. He would have known that her quietly forceful and gracious presence as Viet Cong representative would challenge stereotypes and command attention whenever and wherever she stepped on stage. He probably also realized he could find no Southern representative with a family heritage of greater resonance to encourage support from overseas Vietnamese. Thus, it is no wonder that Nguyen Thi Binh is the Vietnamese participant at Paris whom many people outside Vietnam remember most clearly. After the war ended in April 1975, the Sixth National Assembly met in July 1976, drawing representatives from across the country to reunite North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Reunification combined the PRG and DRVN into the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, the country's formal name today. In 1976, Nguyen Thi Binh became Minister of Education for reunited Vietnam. By 1976, Binh had become an experienced negotiator and spokesperson. She was not only the most famous Vietnamese outside the country but also, through her work with the non-aligned movement, the Vietnamese diplomat who had the deepest relationships with foreign leaders. Thus, many foreigners and Vietnamese alike wonder why the senior Vietnamese leadership did not select Binh to serve as Foreign Minister of newly reunited Vietnam. The answer is simple: the times had changed. Vietnam faced incursions from the Khmer Rouge into southern Vietnam, rumblings with China on the northern border, and an intensive U.S. embargo. Amidst those external challenges was a momentous internal challenge that would be crucial to the new nation's future. Reuniting the country's education. The skills that had served Binh in Paris and her southern roots as a granddaughter of one of Vietnam's most famous educators made her an obvious choice for the daunting task of weaving two very different educational systems into one. The Vietnamese people could not reunite into one country unless and until Northerners and Southerners shared the same level of education. The low literacy rate in the former South, compared with the high literacy rate in the North, and the lack of trained teachers were huge obstacles. Creating a comprehensive and effective educational system amidst internal political challenges and a stifling bureaucracy was a huge assignment, to which she devoted a decade. Subsequently, Binh worked again in people-to-people diplomacy. Then, from 1992 until 2002, she served as Vietnam's vice president, with responsibilities including state diplomacy, education, health, and judicial reform. The chapters in Family, Friends and Country describing state service in newly reunited Vietnam are a manual written in anecdotes for those who want to learn about assertive, but not aggressive, relations across cultures, even in war, the greatest of cross-cultural conflicts. They are also a guide for managing bureaucratic tangles, conservatism, and obstinacy, always with an eye toward ethical action. Binh formally retired in 2002 at the age of 75. She notes that her years since have been very busy, at times even busier than before. She worries, when will we have a society that is truly democratic, equal, and cultured? It is as if these dynamics harass me. I cannot sit still. I must continue to take a full part in life. Perhaps it is my fate from when I was young. I want always to be deeply involved and committed in my work. I am not able and don't know how to stand on the outside. These days, Bin cares as fiercely as ever about children and adults suffering from the effects of Agent Orange and unexploded bombs and mines left from the war. She holds strong positions on rights for women and children. She travels often to domestic and international conferences covering many issues. Yet her deepest commitment remains to Vietnam's future. She worries that the Vietnamese educational system, once among the world's best in spreading limited resources to the most students and adults, has become seriously backward. She adds, "As long as I have an ounce of strength, I will voluntarily contribute everything I can to the important and decisive issue of education." Indeed, here is a feisty activist in her late 80s, who refuses to wait in the wings. She still takes center stage. She is still petite and demure. She still speaks quietly, calmly, forcefully. The world still listens. Lady Borton Hanoi, Vietnam Spring 2015. Preface in the reader's hands is a memoir by me. Nguyen Thi Binh, former Vice President of Vietnam, the country's first woman foreign minister, and head of the delegation of the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam at the Paris Conference, 1968 to 1973. The first thoughts of quite a few people when they pick up this book is curiosity as they anticipate extraordinary stories about the author's participation in the famous negotiations that were the longest in the history of diplomacy. One must say immediately that this particular wish won't be satisfied. However, do understand that this small book contains many extraordinary events, but of a different kind, about one person, about her way, and about her life. The simple title she chose, Family, Friends and Country, captures the sources creating her special strength. Many people who know Nguyen Thi Binh are surprised by 2 points. The first is her appealing strength and persuasive character, qualities that strike not only people in our country but also so many foreigners, including some famous and difficult ones. We know that not long after 1979, many of our long-term foreign friends did not understand when we had to implement the border war in the West and South to oppose the repeated Pol Pot incursions and save the Cambodian people from genocide. They sought out Bin. After they heard her explanation, these foreigners said, "All right. They heard many Vietnamese speak, but when Bin speaks, we believe and trust." During our terribly difficult years of the cruel war against foreign aggression, Nguyen Thi Binh visited all over the world. Wherever she went, people said the same thing. If Bin speaks, then we believe. We can say without fear of error that perhaps Bin is the Vietnamese person with the most friends across the world, from ordinary people to famous heads of state, who represented many different political views. During the war years, she traveled across most of the planet. Here's what was truly unusual and beautiful. The image of Vietnam during our devastating struggle was not an armed warrior but, rather, a slender, unassuming yet erudite woman who was personable and who spoke clearly. Decisive events could not change her leisurely, self-confident presence. She called her work people-to-people diplomacy, meaning one person to another person, one heart to another heart. She brought many friends to our nation's side. This was an important, decisive point in Vietnam's unusual victory during the last century. The second, unusual, point about Nguyen Thi Binh is the youthful strength of her intellect and spirit, her life force, her stunning endurance, and her wide yet deep point of view, which has expanded even during her older years. It seems as if she still stands in our front line, working tirelessly in all the key and important areas of our society's life. I was fortunate to work with Nguyen Thi Binh and be near her for a number of years. I am honored to introduce readers to her writing, which calls on us all to think deeply not only about those seething days in the past but also about our country today and tomorrow. My homeland Quang Nam, my native province, was split into two because of the special circumstances that arose during the American War. After 1975, Quang Nam once again became one province. My ancestral home of Quang Nam is not opulent, but it is abundant and diverse, with bright green rice paddies and many rivers. There is the famous Tu Bon River, the Han River, which is short but full and strong, and the Trong Giang River, which is very special in that it does not pour down from the mountains but, rather, connects one estuary to another. Then there is the Tam Ky River, which appears blue throughout the seasons, and the Company River, which is like a natural canal intertwining and connecting all the waterways across the province. People say Quang Nam province is unique because its waterways, whether large or small, flow freely across the province without finding their way to the sea. Quang Nam also has mountains, the sea, islands, and beaches, which some people consider the most beautiful in the world. UNESCO has listed Quang Nam's Cham Island in its World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Quang Nam also has Hoin. From the 16th and 17th centuries onward, Hoin was a bustling port and the first place in our country to interact directly with the West. Hoin residents conducted business with the Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch traders who arrived early on. The local residents gained experience in international business transactions and the cultures of other civilizations. They also developed a personal dynamism, which was genuine. Da Nang, which is less than 30 kilometers from Hoin, is the largest international gateway to Quang Nam province and Vietnam's central region. In 1997, Da Nang City became one among several major cities linking directly to our national government's central level. The remainder of the province retained the name of Quang Nam but with its provincial capital located in Tam Ky City. Although Quang Nam Province and Da Nang City are administratively separate, their history, traditions, and culture have always been one. This strategic location led the French to station their first soldiers at Da Nang when they invaded our country in the 19th century. More than a century later, the Americans landed their assault marines en masse at Da Nang to open the U.S. limited war in South Vietnam. The United States converted Da Nang into a huge air, infantry, and naval base to command the battlefields in the central region of Vietnam, in the Central Highlands, and as far north as the 17th parallel. In addition, Da Nang was an airbase for U.S. bombing raids against North Vietnam. In modern times, Quang Nam and especially Da Nang were major spear points in our resistance wars against foreign aggressors and, therefore, were among our country's fiercest battlefields. The people of Quang Nam and Da Nang suffered courageously. They endured enormous sacrifices. Quang Nam, Da Nang has over 7,000 heroic Vietnamese mothers. It is poignant testimony that they comprise more than 1/4 of the heroic mothers from across Vietnam. Indeed, the people of my ancestral homeland deserve the assessment of loyal, brave, and resilient. I returned to my ancestral homeland in 1975, after we had completely liberated South Vietnam. I was horrified to see that the U.S. and Saigon armies had bulldozed, leveled, and completely devastated so many villages during their policy of free fire zones. Go Noi, Dien Ban, my paternal ancestral homeland and formerly one of the richest areas of Quang Nam, had been known for its productive fields and green marshes along the Tu Bon River. From long before, that area had been famous for its silk, which had even reached European markets. However, after the war, all that remained was an expanse of bare land, a vast wasteland of sedge grass without the shadow of even a tree, without the shadow of even a single human being. My maternal ancestral homeland to the west of Tam Ky was also an area that had suffered from intense cruelty. The war had also destroyed its villages. The aftermath of war in Quang Nam was devastating, especially the effects of Agent Orange, one of the defoliants that the United States sprayed for years. The after effects continue even today. During the 40 years since the American War ended, the people of Quang Nam, Da Nang have managed to rebuild. In truth, they have rescued life from ashes. Not only were Quang inhabitants staunch during our wars for national liberation, but they are also proud to have contributed significantly to our national culture. For generations, Quang Nam has had a reputation as a seat of great learning with a tradition of eager students and many excellent scholars. At one point, the entire country knew the names of the 5 Quang Nam doctoral scholars and the 4 Quang Nam champions. In the early 20th century, Quang Nam was one of the sites of the Eastern Capital Free School movement, Dong Kin Nia Thuk, and the modernization movement, Dui Tan. Quang Nam still has many areas of extreme poverty, particularly in its mountains. However, nature has her own laws of compensation. The Tien Phuoc area of my maternal ancestral homeland, where dogs eat stones and chickens eat gravel, is the cradle of great patriots. These include my maternal grandfather, Phan Chau Trin, also known as Phan Chu Trin, and Elder Nguyen Thuc Kang. Elder Kang served as interim president of the government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in 1946, while President Ho Chi Minh was in France. People have different opinions about my grandfather's political views. Nevertheless, he is widely recognized as the first Vietnamese person to introduce the concepts of democracy and civil rights in Vietnam. The father of President Ho Chi Minh, Junior Doctorate Nguyen Sin Sac, described Phan Chau Trin as a friend, a fellow graduate, and the first person to organize for citizens' rights in Nam, Vietnam. Historian Hoang Xuan Han speaks about the scholar patriots searching for a way to save our nation at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries. He points out that Elder Phan Chau Trin was the first person to identify our culture's disastrous backwardness as the primary reason we lost control of our country at the time of the French invasion. Elder Phan defined the process necessary to develop our nation. Expand the people's cultural standard, encourage the people's zeal, and support the people's material needs. He was unequivocal. Best of all, study. From this, we can understand his message. The people needed knowledge and understanding in order to awaken national self-esteem. Only then could they undertake the great, dual causes of freedom and happiness. I believe these profound ideals hold priceless long-term value. I believe they apply to all of us today. People regard Elder Phan Chau Trin as the embodiment of Quang character, for he was forthright, purposeful, and independent. The argumentative habit of the Quang inhabitants was evident in his personality. Quang people tend to be passionate about their work. They will take responsibility for the community and for the nation, and they will accept a challenge and plunge in energetically. At the same time, Quang people are rather sentimental, open, and receptive to what is new. Those qualities have led to the following lines from oral poetry. Quang Nam's soil is quick to absorb moisture even before it rains. Quang Nam's people grow tipsy even before sipping red wine. Many of my friends say I inherited the traits of a person from Quang Nam. 2. Childhood. My mother was the second daughter of Elder Phan Chau Trin and a native of Tien Phuoc District's eastern area, which is now part of Phu Ninh district to the west of Tam Ky provincial capital. My paternal grandfather, a native of Dien Ban district, was a volunteer soldier in the Save the King movement. My father, the 10th child in his family, was an official geophysical surveyor. After graduation, he worked in the southwest of Vietnam, always floating on a huge river barge. I was born in Tan Hiep Commune, Sa Dec Province. My parents named me Sa. According to my mother's story, on one occasion, when I was 9 months old and learning to crawl, I slipped into the Tien River, but they immediately fished me out. Since I spent some of my childhood in rural areas, I developed a little understanding of farming, fishing, and catching shrimp. I will always remember the rainy season in the western delta of southern Vietnam, how the rice paddies would flood with water as vast as the sea. Those childhood days had an enduring influence on my entire life, on my activism in social affairs, and on my personal life. Later, the French authorities assigned my father to work in Cambodia. He took the whole family with him, settling us in Phnom Penh for some years. My mother gave birth 7 times. 1 child died from illness, leaving 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. I am the eldest. In addition, several cousins from the countryside came to live with us. Because of economic difficulties, these cousins' families had asked my father to help them continue their education or to find them employment. Our house was always full and happy. Eating meals involved 2 shifts, since we did not have enough table space for everyone at once. Although my father's salary was neither high nor low, he would always help our relatives. Father was hard-working, and he was passionate about technology. On the ground floor, he had a room filled with the machine parts he used for repairs and innovations. Anyone looking for my father after work hours could find him in his special warehouse. Perhaps because my father was dedicated to his profession, he judged people by their attitude toward work. Since a hard-working person was good, he did not like anyone who was lazy. As for his children, he demanded the same from us, whether we were boys or girls. If we knew how to ride a bicycle, then we must also know how to repair the bike and fix its tires. My father liked it when we were eager students reading books and playing sports, but he disliked it when we spent time singing songs and socializing with friends. Later, during my years as an activist and organizer, I always felt close to working people and found it easy to associate with them. I found I usually assessed people through their attitude toward work and their relationship with working people. Thinking back, I am thankful my father had that influence on me. My mother was not healthy, perhaps because she had given birth so often. When she died, I was 16. My youngest sibling was not quite a year old. I had a happy childhood filled with warmth and with the love of parents and relatives. When my mother passed away, I felt anxious and deprived of affection. However, watching my younger siblings, who were so small and vulnerable, I began to sense my own responsibility. I knew I must replace my mother and care for the younger children. While alive, my mother often told me stories about my maternal grandfather, Elder Phan Chau Trinh. He passed away in 1926, about a year after returning from France. I never met Phan Chau Trinh in person and did not directly receive the influence of his expansive, patriotic thinking. From what my mother told me, I know circumstances forced my grandfather to wander across the country from a young age. Then the colonizers arrested him because of his anti-French activities. They might have guillotined Phan Chau Trinh if progressive members of the French Alliance for Human Rights had not zealously supported him. After his release from Con Dao political prison, Phan Chau Trinh requested that the colonial authorities let him go to France, where he lived for 14 years. His intention was to search for support from progressive forces in France in order to pursue independence for our homeland. Even though my family did not live in Vietnam during the early 1940s, News of the communist insurgency in my now Tianjiang province and a number of other southern provinces reached us. Back then, I noticed that my mother often expressed sadness and confided to her close friends, saying, "When will our people fight the French?" In Cambodia, our family lived on Mechi Boulevard, now Preah Boulevard, in Phnom Penh, the capital. Our house of wood had a very special architecture because my father had designed it according to his own specific ideas. The house was spacious, airy, and set behind a wide, sandy area, which would become as white as snow when the moon was full. On moonlit nights, we children loved to chase each other on that white sand. Behind the house were rice paddies. During the rainy season, floodwaters would reach our house pillars. I will always remember the image of our familial house and a childhood shared with my siblings during those years when we still had both our father and our mother. I attended Lycée Sisawith, the largest middle school in Cambodia. Since my father was a civil servant, I received free tuition in the French mother country school instead of attending the school for indigenous children. Most of my fellow students were children of civil servants, who were either French or Vietnamese with French citizenship. My nationalist spirit shared by my younger siblings resulted in a few rows with the French kids. I remember once going out to play. Several French classmates were talking about their servants at home and saying, "All Annamites are thieves." I heard this. I couldn't remain silent. I went up and asked, "What did you just say?" That startled the French kids. I threw them even more off guard when I tossed aside my school bag and started pounding on them. Just then, my younger siblings came along. They joined the fray to back me up. A scuffle occurred in which, fortunately, no one suffered any injury worth describing. The next day, the principal called me in. I thought he would discipline me, but he gave me only a light reminder about proper behavior. At the end of the previous year, my mother had gone to Saigon for treatment when her illness became serious. She was staying at Grandfather Phan's temple in Dachau Ward. After finishing my brevet general education examination, I left for Saigon to visit my mother. I saw my mother's pale face. She was only skin and bones, and felt deep love for her and still more regret that I had not been by her side to take care of her. I cried until my eyes were swollen. Mother looked at me and shook her head, mumbling, "My beloved child." She said, "You still so little." I was tired from a full day's journey from Phnom Penh to Saigon. Exhausted, I fell asleep. Then suddenly our helper shook me awake, saying my mother had just died. At that time, my father was far away on a work assignment, but he returned in time for my mother's funeral. Like my father, my siblings also had no chance to visit our mother during her last moments. I was the only one fortunate enough to see my mother before she passed on forever. We buried her at the Central Region Fraternal Association Cemetery, Trung Kyi Hu. Only in 1976, after the two wars, could we exhume her remains and move her to Grandfather Phan's temple, where she now rests. Before my mother's death, I had dreamed that, upon completing my baccalaureate, I would apply to medical school and become a doctor so that I could cure my mother and treat the poor. I had those thoughts and desires because I had seen the way the doctors treated my mother. Even though these doctors were paid, they were neither earnest nor dedicated. Our family had to beg them for favors. Could it be, perhaps, that we were unable to connect with effective and knowledgeable doctors? And so, I lost my mother when I was 16. My siblings were still very young, just 13, 9, 5, 3, and the youngest only a few months old. While my mother was still alive, I thought only about school and having fun. My father placed many hopes in me. I was a good student, especially in mathematics, where I always scored high marks. Later on, I tutored. For a time, I taught math at several schools. Try to study well. My father would always say, so that later you can have a profession and also care for your younger siblings. It was as if he foresaw our situation. During my high school years, I did study hard and began to think about the future. I loved to read. I would stay up very late reading novels. I also enjoyed listening to the lyrical music of Schubert, Schumann, and other composers, and to grand symphonies. I felt my heart awaken when I heard the song that Lu Hu Fuok had written, calling on us youth. Oh, youth, stand up. Respond to the call of our nation. My parents had sometimes taken us to watch a movie or see Kai Luong, Vietnamese modern opera. These stories stirred me. I recall watching Doi County Lu, Miss Lu's Life, a Kai Luong production which was very famous during the 1940s. Members of the audience turned from looking at the stage and stared at me. I was utterly embarrassed, but I could not restrain my tears. I also loved sports. My favorite was basketball. I usually played with friends all Sunday morning. By the time I returned home, my cheeks were as red as ripe tomatoes. Sometimes, I competed in basketball games with other schools or in cross-country races. I paid attention to sewing and cooking as well, since I wanted to become a woman accomplished in industry, appearance, speech, and good behavior. Like so many girls, I had many dreams. At that time, I met Kang, who would later become my life partner. Beginning in 1944, the situation in our country underwent many vicissitudes. It was as if the atmosphere were smoldering hot, with the forecast vague yet auguring the changes that everyone awaited with worry and excitement. Japanese troops had poured into our country and spread throughout. At this time, I also began to become more aware of many other socio-political concerns. Activities of the Association of Overseas Vietnamese Patriots and then of the movement to assist compatriots starving in the northern region attracted the widespread involvement of Vietnamese living in Cambodia and particularly in Phnom Penh. Of course, members of my family were enthusiastic participants. Gradually, we came to understand about the Viet Minh, the organization that had stepped forward to launch these movements. The Japanese overturned the French administration in Indochina on March 9, 1945. Many Vietnamese in Cambodia felt they should return home as soon as possible to join directly in our country's huge struggle. Our family also decided to return to home. And so, I put aside preparations for my baccalaureate examination. Western sources often incorrectly use the term Viet Minh, which was always a movement and never a government. Viet Minh can be correctly applied in the northern and central regions until the Declaration of Independence on September 2, 1945, when the Provisional Government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam took effect. After that time, the government's formal name or DRVN is appropriate usage. However, in the southern region, depending on context, as in me. Bin's text, Viet Minh, as a movement, not a government, remains appropriate usage for the resistance movement until formation of the National Liberation Front on December 20, 1960. 3. I am a happy person. I must speak about my private affairs because, truly, emotional ties have been the most precious part of my life. When I was 16, my father was working for the Geophysical Survey Office in Cambodia. A number of graduates from the Public Works Department in the Hanoi Polytechnic School came to Cambodia for internship assignments. Since my father held the most senior position in his profession in Cambodia, he received the assignment to guide them. Among these young interns was Mr. Din Kang, the graduate who worked most closely with my father. Older brother, Kang loved sports and was equally good at playing table tennis, volleyball, and basketball. We would often meet on the basketball court. Romance blossomed between us and grew in strength day by day. However, my father was cautious because he didn't know Kang's family. In addition, my father wanted me to complete my schooling. At that time, I had a number of other male friends, but my love was only for Kang. We made promises to each other. When the War of Resistance against France broke out, I went to Saigon to look for Kang and his friends. They had already returned to Saigon and were participating in the organizations that had been started by the Viet Minh. In the middle of 1946, Kang and I met again at Phan Chau Trin's temple. Kang stayed with our family for a few months and then left for Hanoi. Before his departure, he told me, "I must go to the northern region and join our national army, where I have many friends. The situation in the southern region is very complex. It's difficult to know what to do." We parted and promised to see each other soon. Yet it was 9 years before we were reunited in 1954, after I had regrouped to the north. During those 9 long years, I received from Kang only these few words. "Wishing you and your family safety and health." He had written them on a scrap of paper, which was crumpled because a member of a delegation of officials had hand-carried the note from our central-level headquarters in the northern region to the southern region. Could I consider that scrap of paper a letter? Regardless, I was delighted to know that Kang was alive and still thinking of me. Once, when my father was reading an engineering magazine sent undercover from the northern region, he found an article by an author named Din Kang. That's how my father discovered that his son-in-law in the northern region was an army engineer. I was organizing undercover for the resistance in Saigon's inner city and often went out to the liberated resistance zones to work and attend meetings. The comrade leaders of our movement showed concern for me and urged me to reconsider the commitment that Kang and I had made to wait for each other. Should I continue to wait? In truth, at that time, we did not know when our resistance war against France would be victorious. I didn't know when Kang and I might meet again. I told myself that if I found someone whom I loved more than Kang, then I would reconsider. In truth, up until that point, Kang had been the only one I cherished. In late 1949, a delegation from the southern region was about to be dispatched to our central headquarters in the northern region. My fellow sisters in the revolution loved me dearly and knew my story. They asked me if I wanted to go. I thought about this for a long time before replying that I couldn't leave. I realized that, without me, Kang could find someone else. However, I was afraid that, without me, my younger siblings would have great difficulties. I will never regret that decision. Watching my 5 siblings mature was my reward for the love I gave them. Later, they became a great source of moral and spiritual support, and they remain so today. The Geneva Agreement was signed after 9 years of the resistance war against France. On November 23, 1954, I left to regroup in the north. My father was already in Hanoi. I met Kang again. My father had told me that Kang still did not have a wife and was working with the army engineers. The day Kang and I met, I was deeply moved to see him in his army green uniform. He gave me a penetrating look. "How are you?" he asked quietly. He probably perceived me as thinner, since I had been released from prison only a few months before. I will never forget those moments. We rushed to get married because I was supposed to return to Saigon in 2 months to continue organizing. On December 1, 1954, we had a frugal wedding with several plates of biscuits, candies, and cigarettes, plus tea. Our wedding was at No. 2 Din La Street, then the Ministry of Labor. Minister Nguyen Van Dao served as master of ceremonies. Especially touching was the emotional speech my father had prepared with great care. He recalled our story, how Kang and I had endured a very long separation but had waited faithfully. He urged us to love each other until our hair turned silver and our teeth grew loose. Whether we are a father or a mother, we always love our children. When they are young, we nourish and teach them. Once they are grown, we still worry. We worry about whether they'll be happy. My father was like that. His nourishment, concern, and love made me always strive to succeed in whatever I was doing. I wanted my father to be pleased and proud of his daughter. Unfortunately, my father had passed on by the time I received important assignments and had completely fulfilled the responsibilities assigned to me. I am a happy person. I was able to marry the man I loved, my first love. Because of our different assignments, Kang and I were often separated. However, the deep-rooted love between us helped me to stand firm and complete my missions. In 1956, I gave birth to Thang, Victory, our son, and then, in 1960, to Mai, Apricot or Plum, our daughter. As the American war grew fiercer by the day, I had to be separated from my children whenever I took on distant diplomatic missions. My comrades would ask me, "What has been your greatest difficulty in completing the huge tasks the party and state have assigned you?" The difficulties were not few, and the responsibilities I received were always greater than my strength. Many comrades were probably like me. At that time, when our country was totally committed to fighting the enemy, we could not refuse any task that the resistance and the nation asked of us. However, one important difficulty I could not overcome was my one sacrifice: not taking care of my two children. From age 2 onward, they had to live in creches and could come home only once a week. Whenever I was away, their uncles would pick them up, but if all the uncles were busy, then the children would remain at school. When my children were older, I was away all year and had to send Thang and Mai to a live-in school. Then, with the war raging, the children were evacuated with their aunt. Since their father was in the army, he also could not look after them. While on missions away from the city, I would hear bombs falling near the area where my children had been evacuated. I was so worried. I felt as if my heart would burst, for I loved them intensely. War divided our country for more than 20 years. My deepest sympathy goes to my sisters and brothers who were, like me, interminably separated from their children. All of us were unable to give our children the parental love and teaching they deserved. In wartime, many people must sacrifice, for there is no other choice. As to my own family while I was growing up, I must speak first about my father. My mother died very young, when my father was only 42. He loved his children and, given the situation of the resistance struggle, he did not remarry. Now, looking back, I believe my father's hardships probably would have lessened if he had someone to take care of him when he was ill while we children were all away. My father had the courage to express his convictions. People say that during the land reform campaign he dared stand up to protect people who had been unfairly accused. He was in good physical shape from his work as a surveyor. He would cross jungles and wade streams as if such treks were nothing. However, with advancing age, he became ill, perhaps because the enemy had arrested and tortured him many times. Then he served as head of the Southern military engineers who were operating deep in the southern forests with contaminated water. He had to stay in the hospital about 6 months. In 1969, I returned home from the Paris conference to receive new directives and was terribly distressed to find that my father had been in the hospital for several months. He was frail and emaciated. I embraced him. Between tears, I asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were ill?" My father's answer touched me. "My illness is minor," he said. "Your work now is far more important." That was my father's disposition. He loved his children dearly, but he was always also thinking about shared work. He was proud that the whole family participated in the resistance. I remember that during those cruel years my father followed closely the situation in the southern battlefields. He heard news that our relatives were massacred and wept. He heard news that our soldiers were victorious and wept. By that time, 4 of us children were in North Vietnam, but the younger brother closest in age to me, was active organizing undercover in South Vietnam. My father was always talking about Ha, about not knowing how Ha was. In 1968, we heard that Ha had been arrested. This came as a terrible shock to my father. The sad truth is that Ha never again met our father, who died in 1969, when the war was still far from over. Ha was exiled to Con Dao Political Prison Island, where he was held continuously until the liberation of South Vietnam in 1975. Only then was Ha able to return home. On May 1, 1975, our forces liberated Con Dao Prison Island. Boats from the mainland went out to meet our brothers and sisters, who had been prisoners. We siblings met Ha again after 20 years of separation. We hugged with endless joy while also repeatedly speaking of our father. If our father had still been alive, his joy would have been indescribable. During all those war years, like so many other families with each person in a different place, we had few chances to meet. Younger brother Hai, next in line to Ha, went to study in China from 1953 until 1958, when he returned home, but then he and Ho left for the Soviet Union as graduate students. Lone, my younger sister, studied in China from 1961 until 1966. Only Hao, the youngest, went into the army. He was so thin, but he hiked the entire Ho Chi Minh Trail and stayed in the ranks for 6 or 7 years before returning home. Hai and Ho were not present when our father passed away in 1969 and could not accompany him to his final resting place. Only Kang and my 2 children were there. I heard that my son, Thang, mourned my father the most. Perhaps this was because Thang had been living for a long time with his grandfather and had witnessed firsthand the harsh and exhausting toll of my father's old age and illness even as he continued caring for 2 grandchildren. Work usually kept me far from my family, but I felt as if I had them each and all nearby, closely bound to me as the force driving me during every task I undertook. It would be true to say that they had a rather strange life. I can separate the influence and love of my family from my life's path with its many hard places. The members of my family were and are the strength and happiness of my life. 4. Forged during the resistance war against France. In July 1945, our whole family was together in Saigon. Any Vietnamese who lived through that period will recall how everyone wanted to follow the call of our homeland. My father immediately joined Eastern Group No. 1, since that's where his friends were. As for me, I did whatever the leaders asked. One day in late September, our leaders requested that I go to the Saigon Municipal Theater to meet Comrade Ha. I expected an imposing revolutionary, but instead Ha was a rather young man only about 30 years old. Later, I learned that he was an agricultural engineer, who had joined the Viet Minh early on. Comrade Ha had heard that I knew English. The first task he assigned me was to welcome representatives of the British and Indian forces arriving in Saigon on behalf of the Allies to disarm the occupying Japanese. The Allies, representatives whom I met were mostly British. The Indians and French Foreign Legion soldiers were only guards. I had never spoken English with someone from Great Britain. I was terribly embarrassed. I winced most when the British officers asked me about dancing and entertainment sites and matters about which I was completely ignorant. After several days, I requested release from my assignment. Comrade Ha gave me another task, which I now know to be intelligence work. I was to follow individuals to see where they went and what they did. I was equally abysmal at following and investigating. July and August of 1945 had been an animated time in Saigon. People and vehicles bustled about night and day. Young vanguard pioneers practiced marching 1, 2, 1, 2 and singing, To the Streets, by Lu Hu Phuoc. The atmosphere suggested imminent uprising. People were out in the streets in large numbers, yet everything was orderly. It was as if we were feeling the steamy breath of something hugely important about to burst forth. Everyone was in the streets again on the morning of September 2nd. I went with Ha and Hai, the older two of my younger brothers, to the square at Notre Dame Cathedral. Something tremendous was about to occur for the first time. Representatives of the revolution's administration were going to appear in public. Across the country, the Viet Minh had seized political power from France and Japan. The Viet Minh in Saigon had established the city's Provisional Administrative Committee, which was our own city government run by Vietnamese belonging to the revolution. That afternoon, we were waiting to hear the speech that was to be broadcast from Hanoi by the country's new president, Ho Chi Minh, when guns at the French priest's house fired into the throng. Masses of people, who had assembled peacefully, turned into an uprising. A tense atmosphere surged across the city. Clearly, the French colonizers could not bear to withdraw. They were using any method including war to reoccupy Vietnam. Within 3 weeks, as soon as the Allies' troops arrived, we saw that the British and Indian armies were helping the French army return. British and Indian troops guarded the city's access points. They had not come to disarm the Japanese army. Instead, they were in Saigon to stop our struggle. The Viet Minh forces switched to alternative tactics. I received orders to carry pistols from the inner city to the outskirts.